Hello, everyone, and welcome. This webinar is brought to you by TD SYNNEX Public Sector, an authorized CrowdStrike distributor and premier government solutions aggregator that specializes in understanding IT needs and solving the challenges of federal, state, local, education, and health markets. My name is Marianne Antonelli. I am the CrowdStrike Marketing Campaign Manager at TD SYNNEX Public Sector. Today's topic is visibility control security, CrowdStrike's response to changing cloud and identity security challenges in state and local government. Next slide, please. Before we get started, let's go over a few housekeeping items. Your lines will be muted for the duration of the webinar. However, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A or the chat field. This session will be recorded, and as always, if you have any technical questions, please message Felicia in the chat box. Next slide, please. You're in for a treat for today's webinar with two of CrowdStrike's brightest subject matter experts. First one up is Debbi Blyth. She's an executive strategist at CrowdStrike, where she provides strategic advisory services related to enterprise cybersecurity solutions for all industry verticals, including government, education, and healthcare. Prior to joining CrowdStrike, Debbi spent 7 years as Colorado's Chief Information Security Officer. During her tenure, she was successful at doubling the cybersecurity budget, recovering from a large-scale ransomware attack, and measurably reducing risk across the state. Debbi has over 25 years technology background and 15 years leading information security programs. Before joining the state of Colorado, Debbi led the information technology security and compliance programs at TTEC for 5 years and Travelport for 3. Debbi is a Colorado native and graduated summa cum laude with a Bachelor of Science degree from Regis University. Also, we have today is Chuck Hankle, who is Security Solution Architect at CrowdStrike. Chuck brings more than 15 years of experience in the cybersecurity, specializing in endpoint security, vulnerability management, database security, and analytics. He has been an integral part of CrowdStrike for the past 3 years and holds a Bachelor of Science degree in computer science and MBA with a focus on international business. His extensive credentials include being certified as CISSP, AWS Certified Practitioner, and AWS's Security Specialist. Chuck's expertise extends beyond cybersecurity as he possesses notable certification in financial analysis and risk management, namely the CFA and CFR credentials. Chuck is married with Katie and devoted father to their boys Nick, Liam, Charlie, and Jack. Outside of his family, he spends time giggling as a jazz musician, guitarist, and loves working out, mostly running. Over to you, Debbi.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. One thing that I would just add is a lot of people often ask me, what is an executive strategist and what is your role with CrowdStrike? So I thought I would clarify there. As an executive strategist for CrowdStrike, I am not in sales. My role is to strategize with our customer executives, and I run various roundtable discussions so that they can strategize with each other. And then I bring the executive's voice back to CrowdStrike to ensure that the products and the services that we are developing are helpful in meeting the needs of our public sector customers. So I am going to talk today about the global threat landscape, and I'm going to talk about current trends from cyber attacks that we are seeing. Also, the reasons that threat actors are targeting local governments, and then what you should be focusing on as a result. The data that I'm going to cover can be found with a lot more detail in the 2023 Global Threat Report and also the 2023 Cloud Risk Report. And you can download these reports and other super valuable reports from our website. So I put that link there as well. So at CrowdStrike, our approach is unique in many ways, one of which is that we focus on the adversary and we measure the threat landscape in terms of adversary behavior. So I'm going to talk today about volume, speed, and sophistication of current attacks. We'll start with volume. Even if you don't look at, whoops, my slide did not advance. There we go. I was mentioning that even if you don't look at the details on this slide, you can still see this trend. The volume of attacks is growing significantly. And this chart depicts attacks from the beginning of 2019 through the end of 2022, so a 4-year time span. And if you'll notice, during those first 2 years, we saw a 300% increase in unique attacks, 2019 through 2020. But then starting in first quarter of 2021 through the end of last year, so another 2-year time frame, we saw a 500% increase in unique attacks. So the concern here is that attackers are not slowing down. In fact, they seem to be escalating in volume exponentially year over year. Now, CrowdStrike has an Overwatch team, and they are essentially a 24/7 threat hunting team who have the opportunity to observe in real time attacker behavior in customer environments. They measure the speed of the attack in something that we call breakout time. And breakout time is essentially the time that it takes from when the attacker gains a foothold in your environment, so maybe compromises a single system, to when they start moving laterally in your environment. One of the trends that we are seeing is that breakout time has gotten faster over the past few years. Now, back in 2018, breakout time was 9 hours and 42 minutes, meaning that if you detected an attacker in your environment, you had almost 10 hours to evict that attacker before they started causing damage. Today, it is 1 hour and 19 minutes, and many times it is much faster. In fact, in a third of the cases, we've seen it at 30 minutes or less, and we've seen it as fast as within 7 minutes. So time is of the essence, because from the time an attacker compromises a system in your environment, you have only a matter of minutes to evict this attacker, or your entire environment may be compromised. And attackers are not just using malware anymore. Today, 71% of attacks are malware-free. So if you're using legacy antivirus software, that's looking for malware. And if the attacker is now shifting their techniques and you are still looking for malware, you may miss 71% of the attacks that are occurring in your environment. Now, these are the adversaries that are tracked by CrowdStrike. So firstly, we have nation states or state-sponsored attackers, where militaristic or government-sponsored groups within these countries are conducting attacks or reconnaissance for geopolitical gains over rival countries. For these government-sponsored or state-sponsored groups, CrowdStrike gives them an animal cryptonym that is specific to their country. So when we talk about panda, we're talking about China, or bear is Russia, kitten is Iran, Cholima is North Korea. We also track criminal actors, and those are actors who are just trying to make money. That's their only goal. And these may be coming from one of those countries, but they aren't necessarily affiliated with the government or military in the country in which they reside. The vast majority of attacks that you hear about, such as ransomware and others, are conducted by criminal groups. These are typically the actors who are targeting state and local governments and the education sector. For all criminal actors, regardless of what country they're residing in, CrowdStrike calls them the crypto name Spider. And then you have hacktivist and terrorist groups who are causing disruption or disclosing data to draw attention to their cause. And their cause may be social, political, or ideology, or they may be recruiting members, especially in the case of terrorist groups, and we call those Jackal. 33 new threat actors were added in the last year, which means that CrowdStrike is tracking more than 200 adversaries currently. And of course, the more you understand the threat actors and their motivations, the better you can focus your protections in your environments. Now, adversary behavior can be categorized into these three trends. So firstly, they are using third-party software vulnerabilities. So examples of this could be SolarWinds, Log4j, and Microsoft. In fact, Microsoft released over 1,200 patches in 2022, including 28 to patch zero-day vulnerabilities. And there were greater than 9,000 vulnerabilities discovered, the vast majority of which were classified as high or critical. And it's widely known that Microsoft has many inherent vulnerabilities built into their platform to allow all of their various capabilities to interact with and authenticate to one another. And just simply the way that Microsoft's Active Directory works can enable a cloud breach to become an on-premise breach and vice versa. Adversaries are also conducting cloud-based attacks, and they are using stolen identities to make their jobs much easier. Over the course of 2022, cloud exploitation increased by 95%, and attacks by knowledgeable cloud attackers nearly tripled from 2021. Attackers really seem to come up to speed on cloud security and cloud security weaknesses much faster than security practitioners who are a bit behind here. Adversaries such as those listed are taking advantage of cloud-specific tools, and they're doing things like using stolen credentials or altering security controls. They're modifying user accounts to elevate privileges. They're stealing data. They're targeting Microsoft 365 tenants, Google Drive, and Microsoft OneDrive. And they're abusing other software as a service environments and even texting tools like WhatsApp. And identity is a key access point. Valid accounts are used to gain access in almost half of cloud-based intrusions. And in 2/3 of cloud security instances, there are roles with elevated privileges beyond what is required for the purpose of that account. And this is exactly what those threat actors are looking for and counting on to make it easier to breach the environment. And of course, all of this points to human error. Human error continues to be the leading cause of cloud security incidents. CrowdStrike data shows that more than half of container workloads lack properly configured protections, and more than a quarter of workloads run as root or allow escalation to root. And many containers and cloud hosts are often unmonitored by the security team. So as a result, security teams are very likely to miss compromises that are happening in their cloud environment, which makes the cloud and containers a very attractive target for our adversaries. And it is also why CrowdStrike has responded to dozens of security incidents involving cloud infrastructure and containers in recent years. So another thing that we're seeing over the past 3 years, we have seen a rise in access brokers on the dark web. Now, access brokers steal or collect access to organizations such as valid credentials, and then they sell these on the dark web. Our threat intelligence team saw more than 1,200 advertisements for access to organizations from access brokers in 2022, which is a 112% increase over 2021. And among these advertisements, the academic, government, and technology sectors were the most frequently advertised, accounting for a combined 49% of the total advertisements. Credentials to log into government systems, including local government systems, are among the most lucrative types of accounts being sold. They fetch the highest price over and above any other credentials for sale. So I circled that in red on the chart on the right. And when an adversary purchases access to a local government environment, so to your VPN, for instance, that allows the attacker to log in looking like an employee with all of that access that that employee has. So the attacker isn't breaking in, they are simply logging in. And because they are using valid credentials, you may not even notice that you have an attacker in your environment until it is much too late. And according to the 2022 Verizon Data Breach Investigations report, compromised credentials is the most common cause of a data breach. And it's also the cause of 80% of breaches in internet-facing systems. And this has risen by 30% since 2017. So why are the adversaries targeting local governments? Well, there are many reasons. Firstly, you have a large user base, which makes you a great source of valuable PII data. And it also makes a service disruption a big deal. Public safety implications may raise the urgency and the profile of the attack, either drawing attention to the threat actor's cause or increasing the likelihood that you'll pay a ransom. You have many diverse endpoints, including devices and operating systems that are no longer supported. Of course, the adversary knows this, and they see this as an easy way in. And you are a high-profile target. So this attack will make the news probably every single day until your systems and services are function normally again. This negative press may make you more inclined to pay just so you can get your services back online again. And you have numerous stakeholders with pockets of unique and underprotected environments. And you may also have a federated IT or cybersecurity model. And there may not be a central authority who is driving technology and security standards. And you may not have enterprise security policies, which are followed consistently across all agencies or departments. Also, local governments are so often under-resourced. So it may be that your cybersecurity person is also your main IT person. And that person is supporting all of the tech in your local government, and they don't have time to focus just on cybersecurity. Or maybe you do have a person dedicated to cybersecurity, which of course is still not enough to address all of the areas of risk. I'm sure if we polled every single one of you, you would all agree that you do not have the cybersecurity resources that you need to effectively match the pace and capabilities of the adversary. So in light of this adversary behavior, where should local governments focus? Well, firstly, you need 24/7 by 365 coverage to detect threats underway and then to respond to these immediately to prevent breaches. To stay ahead of the adversary, you've got to be able to detect these activities in progress and act quickly to stop them before they are successful. At CrowdStrike, we talk about the 1-10-60 rule, which is you need the power to detect threats in the first minute, to investigate and understand the threats in 10 minutes, and to contain and remediate in 60. You need complete visibility to all of your systems on premise, to systems in the cloud, all type of workloads, and to mobile devices, because you simply cannot protect what you can't see. You also need to be able to monitor your identities to detect and block suspicious activity by administrator accounts, by service accounts, and even just regular accounts, since this may be a sign that these accounts have been stolen or compromised. And you need to be focused on reducing risks while increasing productivity by minimizing the burden of security on the end user. And all of these things are things that CrowdStrike can assist you with. And so now I am going to turn it over to Chuck to go into more detail about these best practices and how CrowdStrike can assist.
Yeah, thank you, Deb. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I'm going to put us into presenter mode here. Yeah, so Deb, thank you for that really informative background and contextual information around the adversary. And I'm going to continue that theme through my presentation as I talk about solutions and how, as defenders, we can position ourselves and protect our organizations. I'll keep with that adversary perspective. So just to level set, so CrowdStrike has a very robust platform that's delivered through this unified sensor. So one sensor, we have about 23 modules, and they fit within these particular, as I'm scrolling around here, these particular buckets or pillars, if you will. And today we're really just going to talk about identity protection as one and cloud security. And I'll give you some high level information about these particular solutions. And then maybe we'll even, if we have time, take a peek in the console so that you can visualize what CrowdStrike is doing. But first, I'd like to start off just because this will help me kind of tailor my conversation. So it's a poll question. And the first one is, what does your Active Directory environment look like today? So if you could please start that poll for the participants. And I'll go through a slide or so, and then we'll shut down the poll and then look at the results. So as we talk about the problem, and Debbi talked about this at kind of a macro level, right? Intrusions primarily today use identity, stolen credentials. Debbi talked about access brokers selling credentials on the dark web. It's very easy for adversaries to get credentials. So that's one of the challenges that we have, is we have adversaries who used to use malware and now they're using credentials to get into environments. The other aspect of this is we don't know what we have as an organization. So unmanaged hosts has become a real problem. And it's a place, because an organization does not know what they have. They don't have visibility. Therefore, those don't get patched. It's kind of like you don't know that you left your window open, and then somebody can certainly jump right in. And then adversary tradecraft. Deb talked about this with many data points. And talking about the increase in access broker ads on the dark webs. And those could be anywhere from, threat actors to even a college kid wants to make some fast money and breaks into an environment, gets credentials, and then sells them on the dark web. If you can go ahead and shut down the poll, we'll look at the results here. Okay, looks like. Okay, here we go. We're getting some. Okay, so we have some people moving to the cloud. All right. So thank you for answering that poll for me. We're going to move along here. So when we talk about the IT landscape, why are we having some of these challenges? Well, if we think about our IT ecosystem, right, it's really has changed. So back when I was a little guppy and I was doing work in a data center, we had the situation where we had pretty much desktops, laptops, and servers, right? And that was pretty much it. Our IT ecosystem was fairly static and it was fairly simple. And if you look at how the world is today, we have bring your own devices, we have IoT, we have cloud, we have very ephemeral workloads with containers, Kubernetes, things like that. We have hybrid work environments. So not only have we increased in complexity, but it's become very dynamic as well. So that creates, a great challenge. And when you put on top of that, when you talk about identity specifically, and most organizations run some sort of Active Directory. Active Directory has this massive attack surface, right? If you think about the previous slide, how that extends the attack surface, Active Directory does that as well. And I'm certainly not picking on Active Directory. Active Directory has been around forever. It was architected in the days before the cloud. It's older technology. And typically you have very few resources managing a huge environment, right? So you have just a couple administrators that are managing a very large Active Directory environment. And that's just a recipe for having to cut corners in order to meet the demands of what's going on with the needs of the business related to Active Directory. But that also means a side effect of that is that we are creating open attack surface and opportunities for the adversary. So to kind of illustrate what I'm referring to here with the attack surface, so hopefully everybody is somewhat familiar with the cyber kill chain, right? Where we talk about the steps, and these are steps that an adversary typically would have to take in order to get into an environment, right? So initial access, discovery, privileged escalation, credential access, lateral movement, and impact. So when you are able to leverage identity, you can skip some of these essential steps and move right to lateral movement. So what that allows the adversary to do is get faster, the ability to move laterally in your environment. So when Debbi was talking about breakout time, and she was talking about that 1-10-60 rule, and she was giving you statistics on how quickly an adversary can break into the environment, it starts to bring all this together where hopefully you can see why adversaries are favoring credentials rather than malware, right? Because they are able to fast track and really get into an organization with just using these credentials and doing it more quickly. So how do we take that fractured kill chain or cyber chain and deal with it, right? So what we believe at CrowdStrike, our strategy is we developed a unified platform that really provides visibility and create a protection for defenders across endpoint, workload, identity, and the data itself, right? So we're trying to give our customers a platform where they can protect their data, protect their identity, and protect their workloads, give you visibility throughout that entire ecosystem, and understand how you would be able to mitigate attack, how you would be able to remediate if you do have something going on in your environment. So the first solution I'll talk about is Falcon Identity Protection. And identity protection is a solution where we do basically three things. We give you complete visibility into your environment. So when our sensor, our CrowdStrike agent / sensor, I'll use those terms independently, whenever that's installed on an Active Directory server, we will immediately start scraping the information in Active Directory, and we'll start mapping that to events and to risks within the organization. And then we'll give you that information so that you can become more proactive. And typically Active Directory, as I mentioned before, it's an under-resourced aspect or solution from a management perspective. So typically what you have is a lot of risk in your Active Directory environment. And then we can also block and detect identity-based threats in real time. So what we do is when an authentication comes through, we actually pause that authentication process and do analysis on it. And then before we would let that user go ahead and to their final destination. And then the last thing that we can do is layer conditional access. So if you think about that scenario that I just mentioned with pausing authentication, if it's something that's risky, you can actually build a policy to say, hey, I'm not sure I trust Chuck, so I'm going to force Chuck to prove he is who he says he is. So I'm going to force him to do a multi-factor because he's trying to log into a very highly critical asset within our organization, or he's just a risky user because he has too much risk associated with his user, with his account. So those are the three things we can do, and that can be very effective in mitigating threats. So a little bit more on just what we do from a conditional standpoint. So you can see here, we would send an MFA. We're not an MFA provider, but we partner with all of the big MFA providers out there. So we allow you to integrate out of the box with your MFA solution, and then you can leverage this sort of protection. If you're going to something like a domain controller or RDPing, right? So doing a remote desktop into a server. Those are all things that are typically behavior based from administrators, but also those are how adversaries get along throughout the environment. So with this, right, we're trying to simplify the deployment, trying to give you with a single agent this view with both identities and endpoints. They do work together, and they can certainly coexist, and we can leverage some of the information we gather between those two aspects of our modules. Right, so tight correlation across the endpoint and identity telemetry. And then on top of that, right, as Deb spent most of her time talking, we have threat intelligence, right? And all of this is baked into the CrowdStrike platform. So I'm going to break out here for a minute, and I'm just going to show you what that looks like. So you can see this is the main dashboard, and we're not going to go too far into this. I'm just going to show you a couple things that you can do. So as I said, when this sensor gets installed on an Active Directory server, right, we're going to be able to start scraping this information. And you see, we give you a risk score, we give you a trending score, we give you a matrix, and then we have many ways that you can slice and dice this information. So as an example, as soon as this installs, within a few minutes, you're going to get information on, here's my privileged accounts, right? So if I look at my privileged accounts, 5 of my users are using compromised passwords. So passwords, credentials that have been involved in a public breach are the same credentials that these people are using to log in, right? So that's a huge security risk, but it's also something that's easy to fix. You can set up a policy that says anybody who logs in with this type of scenario, force them to change their password. Passwords that never expire. Here's another situation, right? So these are things that's kind of the low-hanging fruit that you can really start to lower your risk threshold in Active Directory as you do this, as you start to remediate these. We're going to take a look at a particular user, and I just want to show you quickly before we pivot the information that I can get about this user. So I can look at the different groups that my users are involved in. I can look at what assets they typically use, what destinations they typically go to. So where does our good friend Amanda here, where does she typically log in? I can look at her login history. And what we can do is even things over time, like we can have analytics with our identity solution that say, hey, Chuck logs in every day around 7:30 from Western Pennsylvania. And then all of a sudden, Chuck, that same day, 2 hours later, tried to log in from, somewhere in Eastern Europe. Well, that's not really a realistic scenario, and that's a risk. So we can catch those risks that are more behavior associated and mitigate them, or say, hey, I want Chuck to do a multi-factor to prove he is who he says he is. But for each user, we'll actually give you the risks associated with that user. So if you have a risky user, you can just remediate these particular risks, and then that user score will go down. Okay, so that's all I think we have time to show for identity. Let's go back and let's talk a little bit about cloud. So I kind of put these polls backwards, so that's on me. So if we can start the second poll, and now that we've finished with identity, I'm very curious to see what you all have as far as what you're doing, if anything. And look, this is not a test. This is not a shaming exercise, right? Because there's no right or wrong. Everybody is where they're at in their security journey. So what we're here to do is make you better, not slap you on the wrist. Okay, so we have some of the participants. Let me move that out of the way. So I'll let people go ahead and continue to answer that question. And we're going to start talking about cloud. And Debbi talked about cloud a decent amount as part of her her talk around, the adversary. So adversaries love the cloud. The cloud is a kind of a rich new ground for them to try to break in, right? And since cloud is new to everybody, and it has something called a shared responsibility model, it's ripe for the adversary. So they take advantage of it because there's a lot of human error, as Debbi mentioned in her talk track. So CrowdStrike's approach to the cloud, in some ways, we approach it like we do everything else. We focus on the adversary, and the adversary, what they're doing, how they're trying to get in, right? So we watch how the adversary tries to break into the cloud. We also monitor the attack surface. And then we do something similar to what I just showed you with identity. We look at the risk and exposure and try to help you mitigate that. So, and by the way, if anybody wants to finish up with the poll, I'll leave it open here for another minute or so, and then we'll go ahead and close that down. As Debbi mentioned about all the issues around runtime with running as root and privileged escalation, that's the other thing. So we try to protect runtime and then just insert ourselves into that DevOps cycle that you see, which is very, very popular in cloud environments. Oops. Okay, so with CrowdStrike's cloud solutions, we can prevent runtime attacks, right? So we have the ability to stop attacks during runtime as they're being executed. We also have the ability to do threat hunting in the cloud, right? So that's one of the services that CrowdStrike offers. We can simplify detection and response, and how we do that is really with the same aspects of how we do it with a more traditional endpoint. And then enable response for cloud native application lifecycle, right? So we're not bolting on the cloud. CrowdStrike itself is a cloud company. So we get the cloud. It's not something that was an afterthought, or we're not carrying a whole lot of tech debt, if you will, from that aspect. Why adversaries first? Because you need to know how to defend the organization, right? So if you don't understand the adversary and how the adversary is looking at your organization, you're not really able to be as efficient or focus on the types of threats. So something that Debbi was talking about is particular industries, particular geographies. They all have some similar, but some very different types of threat actors or types of approaches that threat actors will take. So the two solutions we have, the first one is called Falcon Horizon, and these solutions work together, by the way. And Falcon Horizon is really about understanding compliance, right? Understanding the ability to do an assessment in the cloud and look at misconfigurations. Because if you go back to, I know I keep referring to Debbi's presentation, but misconfigurations are a huge part of what goes on in the cloud and why adversaries are able to leverage the cloud. And then from the cloud, they can get on premises, right? So just if you think that your cloud environment is separate and you don't have to worry about it, and combine in conjunction with what you have on premises, that's a mistake. So by misconfigurations, what I mean is, as an example, is, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, do you happen to know that your S3 bucket is public, open to the world, so anybody can access it, right? These are things that you may or may not know. And again, this is difficult because with the shared responsibility model, the cloud provider is responsible for some aspects of the security, but so is the customer, meaning the people who stand up the AWS service for their organization, right? So you have two parties that work in conjunction, hopefully, to protect the cloud. So indicators of misconfiguration, we call them IOMs, right? And these are configuration settings. And what we can do is we can do this assessment up to every 2 hours, where we can say, oops, something just went askew based on what you were trying to do, or your configuration aspect. And the other part of it is indicators of attack. And these are activities that are occurring in the cloud that show adversary tactics and techniques. So the other solution that we provide is all about runtime, right? It's all about protecting the ephemeral workloads or the runtime workloads in the cloud. And we have things like application level logging, container image assessment. So, when Debbi was talking about in her threat intelligence section, where containers or these ephemeral workloads are highly misconfigured or highly insecure, right? We're able to insert ourselves into that process and look at things at runtime and help customers understand where they might be vulnerable. Let me just build this out. Whoops, one too far. Sorry. Yeah, so it's all about visibility. Again, you just like I was mentioning in the identity section, right? We have visibility of our security posture. We want to protect runtime. We want to protect the control plane, the administration aspect, and the images, right? Because if you think about how cloud works, right, you build these and then you spawn off these particular instances from that image. So when we look at everything from a holistic perspective, the end result is you get this visibility aspect. And I'm going to move on to the final slide here. I'm going to show the visibility access to be able to look at cloud security, indicators of misconfiguration, and then the runtime protection and the workload protection, right? So we're able to holistically insert ourselves into the cloud and take a look and protect you there. So what does that look like in real life? So if I go to cloud security posture, this is one of the things that I was talking about, right? This is our cloud security posture management. I referred to it as Falcon Horizon. If you look under cloud security, you'll see it's cloud security posture. And what we're doing is looking at critical indicators of misconfiguration or high, and then I can drill down into these and take a look. And we're going to be able to have a list here of, here's the example I used. I didn't even plan that. S3 bucket configured for public access. All of these things, I'll just pick a few. IAM policies that allow full admin privileges to an attached user, right? So all of these things are misconfigurations that over time present a risk and could be exploited. And then we'll give you all the misconfiguration instances within this. So what this allows you to do, similar to, I see a lot of people when they did the poll results for Active Directory, they manage Active Directory hygiene, right? As one of the things that they did. And this would be the same thing, right? You're managing basically the hygiene of the cloud. And that's kind of the first step. And that's where a lot of people start when you're starting your cloud journey, right? You start with just putting things into the cloud. You're not really running workloads, but you're starting to build out infrastructure and do some different things. And this would be the solution that would help to protect that, right? And we can even do some automatic remediation. So as an example, let's say you have a Lambda function and somebody keeps disabling that Lambda function. Maybe it's an adversary trying to disable CloudTrail logs in AWS as an example. You can set up a remediation to automatically restart that Lambda function if it gets turned off. And that way it limits the amount of gap you have in your visibility. So with that, it's about 1/4 and I can stop sharing and we can move on to Q&A if that makes sense at this time.
At this time, if you have any questions, or please put it in the Q&A bucket. Okay, I got a question here, Chuck. Doesn't the cloud provider handle security for their customers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that goes back to the shared responsibility model that we talked about. And the shared responsibility model, again, means basically the cloud provider is going to handle securing certain aspects of the cloud, and the customer is going to have to handle security for certain aspects of the cloud. And the challenge in that is it's a little bit different with each cloud provider, right? And most customers I work with, they're not in one cloud, they're in both AWS and Azure, and maybe even GCP, right? So customers tend to go into multiple clouds. Each one has a little bit different guide rails, and things change depending on what type of workloads you select. So just make sure you understand that as you move things to the cloud, you have a part in securing that cloud environment.
Great. I think I see another question here. It says, do I still need to protect identity if I have a PAM solution?
Yeah, with regards to PAM, we get this question a lot because there's confusion. So a PAM solution is more about privileged access management. So you're managing the administrative accounts or how access should be. What CrowdStrike solution is doing is pretty much focused on the ability to stop threats, add friction to a login process if it seems risky, or to help customers reduce the amount of risk through AD hygiene.
Okay, I see another question pop up. Why can't an EDR solution prevent identity attacks, or why isn't EDR enough?
Yeah, so up until probably very recently, I would say a couple years ago, we relied on EDR type solutions to provide the telemetry to be able to detect threats with identity. And this was kind of if you roll back time about 3 years ago or so, identity was something that was a lot less protected from a dedicated fashion. So the challenge with EDR is EDR looks at processes, it looks at host information, it looks at identities, but EDR, the telemetry that's collected, doesn't really have a way to really specifically call out identity and understand it in the way that solutions that are integrated into Active Directory can, right? So now that's not to say that it wouldn't be caught. It's the same. I'll use the analogy if somebody downloads or gets an email and that email has an attachment to it, CrowdStrike can stop that if it was missed by the email security. It's the same with identity, right? So if identity, if there was no, or back when there was no identity solutions, it could potentially still catch an attack. It's just a lot harder because we don't have that specific visibility, and it would be further down the kill chain, right? So the adversary gets further and further, and that gets riskier and riskier. So what we want to be able to do is look at identities. And I always use the analogy is it's easy to see if Chuck stole a car, if I, busted out the driver's side window to break into the car. But if I just use someone's key and started driving the car, if you saw me driving down the street, you couldn't tell if it was my car or not, right? So identity provides that additional telemetry that we need to be dialed into protecting against identity-based attacks.
Thanks, Chuck. And if there are any other questions, please drop it into the Q&A box. And let's see, I don't see anything coming in. I think that is it for today. And thanks everybody for coming. And now we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.